Welcome to my show, My Planets in What? Just a little tongue-in-cheek,
Yes.
I think people are laughing about the name, and I love that. Today's episode we're going to call, We Went to the Underworld, and All We Got Was This Podcast. So welcome to my friend Judith. Basically, from what I know is that you're a psychological astrologer, and you're really interested in deep myth, soul, and also serious research. You're really a researcher. And so we're going to talk about some of a paper that you've written. We're going to get into that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then, although I've been trying to not talk about Beyoncé every week, we did have a salon at your house, actually last night, where we talked about the fixed stars. And, we looked at Beyoncé's chart because I threw it out there because I can't help it. And we did find some interesting things. So
it was a great example.
Yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit. So how are you doing today? How do you find yourself?
Oh, just glad to be here. It was so much fun having everyone over last night and just connecting with LA astrologers. I'm doing great.
Every time I go to an astrology meetup, I don't know why, but I'm always so surprised how just so intelligent everyone is. It's not, and nothing against, psychics or anything like that, but astrologers they come with their data, they come with their background, and I really appreciate that. And I think astrologers seem to have this serious side to them, would you say?
Yes, and everyone has a unique area of interest, and so everybody contributes something, whether they're a Hellenistic astrologer, evolutionary, psychological like myself, horary.
Yeah, I love horary. So, okay, we'll get started with the first segment, which is my chart confession. So, What sign do people think you always are when they guess?
Gosh, I don't think people. I can't think of people who guess. I'm
really?
just around all these LA astrologers.
Everybody knows
just
me.
Asks. Just ask.
Well, I can say what I picked up right away from you was your kind of, not seriousness, but you're very direct and you're very straightforward. Right. I got that right away. And then I also picked up, some Venus Libra things with the way you dress and the way you're composed, and there's this kind of elegance. So, and that can also fit with that Saturn, with the exaltation of Libra. So, a Saturn vibe right away. And what would you, how do you think that resonates?
Well, absolutely. So a lot of people I'm around aren't astrologers, so they'll say right away, well, you're really serious. Or you just need to stop thinking. That's my Aquarius sun. So Capricorn rising, Aquarius sun, Saturn in the 10th house. Yeah, very serious.
Yeah, but I have a thing with Aquarius. I think also just being a Leo, some of these signs I square, my sun squares, fixed signs can be kind of intense. And I've learned to really take myself less seriously. And, Scorpios can be sort of intense, but if you're playful with them, they kind of lighten up. And I find that with Aquariuses too. Mm-hmm. I'm just I get it. I understand. And I know that the seriousness also has some sweetness to it. It really does. So anyway.
I love being around people with a good sense of humor.
Oh yeah, totally. So is there a sign that you irrationally sort of have an aversion to? You're it's okay, it's not like we hate the sign. It's do you have an aversion where you're ugh?
Well, for a while, Virgos were a little bit difficult, yes. But, I've come to really appreciate them. I have a lot of friends now with Virgo rising or whatever, and so I've come to appreciate that sort of down-to-earth analytical ability.
Is it the sort of meticulousness?
Yeah, it's the meticulousness. It's they're a little too earthy, and maybe that's just me.
They're just more cerebral. And then do you have any birthday twins? Anybody who has a birthday that you know of that's near you, or a celebrity, anybody you think about?
Well, I am a twin.
You are a twin?
Yes, I have a twin sister. Yes. So I don't need any other twin. Yep, I got a twin. And it is really interesting. It is amazing how the chart, you as being a twin, it's we have the same chart 9 minutes apart. There'll be subtle differences, but hardly anything. But we really live out the same life, but on different levels. So, a chart is symbolic.
Right.
And so there's many ways to live out that basic archetypal principle. So for example, I decided to study psychology, and so I've studied the principles that govern people from a psychological perspective. She's an attorney, and she wanted to study the laws that govern people as well, but from the perspective of the larger culture who makes laws. So we both are
Interesting.
interested in laws, but from a different perspective. And it's just the way I find it. And but there's also a lot of crazy stuff. Like we haven't seen each other a while. We show up at each other's house and we're both using the same toothpaste. I'm like, okay. Or we call each other and we say, I've been thinking about this. And yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, we're thinking the same thing and going through similar experiences.
Interesting.
Yeah, very similar. It is scary.
Sometimes if the ascendant is near a boundary, those twins can have a very different experience because they have a different first house ruler. But if it's really that close and it's sort of in the middle of the rising, then I could see there being a lot of similarities. I have a friend who's a twin, and they're both like rocket scientists.
Oh, really?
And I'm like, that
Wow.
is crazy.
Oh, wow.
So it does happen, not always, but I see when the ascendant really is truly that close. Sometimes it's not minutes apart from the two babies. There's a little bit more space. Okay, and then I always ask this, but it's sort of a joke, but like how gay and queer do you think astrology is? Because at the conference, it was like there was like a very queer presence, and I always notice that in these spaces. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, when I first began to study astrology in 1977, immediately you just start to meet queer people. I mean,
Yeah.
they're just a part of astrology.
Yeah, I find it. It's just something I appreciate.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into your paper. So you wrote a paper called A Psychological Interpretation of the Myth of Inanna's Descent to the Underworld. So we'll go through kind of why you think this Venus story resonates so much with you, and then have, what your experience with Venus is. Because I know you've kind of played with astrocartography as well in your personal chart. So like set us up here, tee us up for how you want to kind of walk through this. And I do have some of the questions that you were sort of answering towards the end of your paper that
Yeah.
we can kind of go through as well.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I didn't really think until you've asked me that, why the Venus retrograde. I love to look at mythology. And it actually just happened. I was teaching a course on the Venus retrograde, and I knew of the myth. And so I decided, well, we're going to learn about Venus retrograde from the myth. And I was amazed in the class when we started to do chart examples of how people who are having the Venus retrograde, make a major aspect in their chart, how it so reflected the myth. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like incredible. I need to understand this more. I mean, I do have a trine of Venus and Sag to Pluto and Leo. And so I have a T-square, which is involved with research. So Venus kind of fits in, makes a nice trine. So it may just be that, I just became really interested in, Venus and Neptune, the descent into the underworld. And maybe that's why I decided to sort of go a little more in depth and really try to understand this. But I was just so amazed at how it really reflected the myth. And then I thought, I have to interview these people and just hear more of their stories and get the time frame down. And yeah, it just really reflected.
The researcher in you.
Yep.
So you talked about a few things. So there's loss of something of value. So let's walk me through what that looks like.
Yeah, so I realized there were 6 basic stages that people went through after I did the interviews. And the first stage is loss of something value. And often that happens right at the beginning of the shadow period, when Venus hits that degree that later it's going to then go direct at. And so that prefigures the Venus retrograde. And at that point in time, people have some kind of a loss, and they may not realize the significance at the time, but for example, one woman, she had gone to India, she was in an ashram, she goes every year, she herself is a spiritual leader of a center, and she fell in the shower and broke her wrist, so she had to go to a doctor, and he had to cut off her ring. And so she, that was an experience of loss. It wasn't the only loss, but it was the initial loss right at the beginning of the shadow period.
Did that come into play later?
Yes. Well, it became significant for the whole Venus. So what then happened was, we start with the loss, and so as a result, the doctor had to cut her ring off
Right.
and put her arm in a cast. And then, so the next point after the loss is the confrontation with others. So she was at the ashram, and it's related. You'll see how it all relates. And she had come to see the mother of the ashram, and that's who they had come. They would come year after year to see. So she was a pretty regular visitor with other people from the spiritual center. And she had gone before the board and said, I would like to publish a better translation of a book about the life of the mother. And the board said no. And she was really upset. So this was the second part, the point of confrontation, because it really wasn't comprehensible to people in the West, is how she felt. And she felt she needed a real good translation to really convey the life of the mother. So that was the point of confrontation. But then the third point is the point of death, or an emotional experience of death. So because of the ring having to be taken off and her arm had to be put in a cast, she couldn't wash that arm. So she was unclean and couldn't go into the temple for the services. So she had to sit outside with the untouchables. And she felt as if she were dead, that she couldn't go in, she couldn't be near the mother that she had come to see. So that's the third state.
So there's this, it says emotional feeling of a near-death experience. So she was feeling like this death, that she was unclean and couldn't actually reach her family.
Yeah, her family, her students, her friends, the mother to whom she felt very close to. And, she developed a great compassion for the untouchables then. She realized, that, this was a difficult situation for them to be in, that they themselves couldn't ever go in to the temple. So she developed a real strong sense of compassion.
Interesting.
Which is an important part of what happens to Inanna in the underworld. We should talk about Venus.
Yeah.
And what Venus means.
Yeah, let's actually take a step back and talk more about Venus.
Yeah.
So you were explaining to me the other night, like, sort of how Venus was born, because I was talking about the planets with the relationships to each other. So it's sort of traditional Hellenistic approach where, Saturn and Venus have this relationship where Saturn loves Venus and Venus feels sort of responsible for Saturn because, Saturn's exaltation is in Libra. And so there's this certain sort of relationship between the planets. Jupiter and Mercury don't like each other because they have just a different approach towards life, the analytical versus the just kind of wing it.
Yeah.
Venus as this archetype, like, walk me through a little bit of the mythology.
Well, so I love that when you said that the other night, because it hadn't dawned on me. I mean, I've studied Hellenistic, but the idea of that close relationship between Venus and Saturn. So, Saturn was a Titan who was born from Gaia and Uranus. And at one point, Saturn castrates his father, Uranus. And when the phallus falls into the sea foam, Aphrodite is born in the sea foam and comes up on the shell. So Saturn is actually involved in the birth of Venus.
That makes sense.
And that was just such a nice image. I thought, wow, yeah, okay, so.
Yeah, because when we're doing horary, we're looking at each planet as a character, and also if you didn't know, Aphrodite and Venus, that sort of is the same.
Yeah, so Inanna, and her descent to the underworld, was a Sumerian name for Aphrodite or for Venus, for the planet. So, they were studying the planets very closely, and after doing this myth, I really became convinced that mythology is simply an explanation of planetary patterns. There's just no question about it in my mind now.
Yeah.
But back to Venus. We'll go ahead.
Well, that just reminds me that today is Friday, which is the day of Venus. and I love to talk. It's like my party trick in a sense where I'm like, well, did you know that every day is named after a planet?
Yes.
And some of the prefixes don't work, but in other languages they do, because English has some prefixes from Germanic folklore. So like Monday is Moon Day, Tuesday. So Tues star is another name for Mars in Germanic folklore. Oh. And then Mercury is Wednesday, which is Woden is another name for Mercury. So it's Woden's Day. Thursday is Thor's Day, another name for Jupiter. And then Frigg's star, I believe, is Friday with another name for Venus. And then Saturn Day is Sunday. And I love that. People are like, what? And so I just think it's cool that we're doing the Venus talk on the Venus Day. That's pretty cool, because we were going to do it yesterday and we moved it.
Oh, right. Yeah. And another really cool thing I only realized this morning is that I wrote this talk 8 years ago. I mean, I gave my class 8 years ago and interviewed my students 8 years ago. And that's the Saturn. Saturn has an 8-year cycle. And it returns every 8 years to the same degree. And I realized that this recent
You mean Venus? Venus has
returns in
an
the same
8-year cycle.
8-year cycle and returns to the same degree. And this recent Venus retrograde we just finished this winter is the same Venus retrograde I was under, the same degrees, hitting my Mars in the third house.
Full circle.
When I first, decided to do that. I know.
There is something to, I mean, sometimes we try to make things electional and we try to set them, and sometimes things just sort of work out that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's fun.
But back to Venus.
Okay, back to Venus. Inanna.
Inanna, yeah. So Venus, well, we'll talk about her as Venus because that's how we talk about her in astrology. So I do tend to use Aphrodite as well because that's the Greek name. But Venus really is about our values, about our sense of self-worth. And because it's what we value and what we think is worthwhile, it's where we put our money. So it has to do with our money, our resources, our sense of self-worth. And when I think about Venus, I think about the opposite house, which is the 8th house. Now, I know Hellenistic uses Mars, but as a psychological astrologer, I use Pluto, the god of the underworld. So the 2nd, 8th house is an opposition between Venus, our values, our resources, and the 8th house, Pluto, which has to do with emotional intimacy and vulnerability and our true desires that push us in the direction we need to go and other people's money. Because when we have a Pluto transit, it's all about who are we really? What are we doing? Are we really following our path? And so talking about Venus and the goddess of the underworld is a bit like the 2nd, 8th house.
Interesting. Were you there at the talk, the 8th house talk at Norwalk?
No, I missed it.
We were talking about, the 8th house with these sort of modern ideas of like sex and death. Mm-hmm. And there is some of that, but the reasoning why we look at it that way is so by primary direction at the 8th house, planets are moving towards the descendant, but by secondary motion, they're moving the other way, away from the descendant. And so there's this dragging planets to their closure, to their resolution on the 7th house cusp. So the 8th house represents that dragging that planet against its will to conclusion.
Right.
And I find that to be the best way I've ever heard the 8th house explained, because it's kind of how it is. Like you're being dragged through something.
Right. And the underworld is about being dragged through something you don't want to, because, so we talked about the first step is loss in a Venus retrograde, and the second step is confrontation. And that's, people don't like confrontation, don't like to be confronted, but Pluto, as Rikago, confronts. And that is being dragged to an awareness you don't want, because often confrontations are really about somebody is seeing you for who you are, and they're trying to get you to move in that direction. We don't like to see it that way, because there's the shadow part of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge, but confrontations often are worth reflecting on.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we change.
Come to know ourselves. But yeah, always learning through relationships. So the reflection on values, relationship, or money. So, I mean, that really depends on where your Venus is, what aspects she makes in the chart, what house, what sign. So that's where the real...
I have Venus in Cancer in the 8th house, actually.
Ah, okay.
So I have some 8th house energy.
So when you have a Venus retrograde on that, hitting that Venus, then it's going to bring up issues of the 8th house.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an example of my client, what she realized was, in terms of her values, she had started and was running a spiritual center, a spiritual retreat center. And she realized that she had to make it financially viable after her death, because she's an older woman.
Right.
And so she realized after this experience, when she saw, I guess there's one part I didn't tell. So after she left the ashram, the mother died. And so that was another loss for her, within that year. And so she realized that she would never see the mother again. And that was really hard. So that was kind of like another loss that was part of her experience. Wow. And so she realized, herself, that she herself, wasn't always going to be around to keep the spiritual center going. So she realized she had to make it financially viable. And she had to think about, who would take my place here? Who would come and run it? Who would keep it going? And so then she started to reflect upon what she needed to do in her life, because her whole life had been creating this community of women and her own spiritual center. So that was, the reflection upon values for her, and finances, money, resources.
And then the perception of being marked by experience.
Yeah, so she really just felt like she just felt like a changed person. I can think of how it was for her. She just felt like she had to do something different, that this whole experience had changed her. And then she began to think about what choices she had to make. And she realized, and this is kind of when we move into the warrior phase. And so maybe I'll back up before I talk about the choices. So if we think about the Venus retrograde, so Venus goes retrograde for 40 days, 40 nights. And we see her, and I'm just talking about, so we see her in the West as the evening star. 14 days before she disappears, she goes retrograde. So she's the evening star, and she was known as the lover. The Sumerians called her the lover. And then she then sets, and she disappears, and it was thought of her going into the underworld. So at this point, she's the warrior, and she's invisible when she's moving in the underworld, and she moves into a conjunction with the sun. So the Venus is sitting between the earth and sun, and it appears from our perspective that she's moving into a conjunction with the sun, so she becomes invisible. And we can't see her in the night sky for 14 days. 7 days as it moves into the conjunction, and 7 days as it moves away. So this is the period when she's actually in the underworld, and she's disappeared. And so then, 7 days later, she moves and rises in the east. And then she becomes visible again. And she's known as the morning star, as the warrior goddess. So she goes from being the lover goddess, she goes into this descent into the underworld, and then she emerges in the morning star, as the morning star, as the warrior goddess. So this is an important part of the whole, transition that people go through. They go from being the lover to the warrior. And if we think about Aphrodite, like you're saying, Aphrodite, usually strong Aphrodites have a lot of grace, they have a lot of charm, they get a lot of access because of their beauty, their charm, they have access to money, to places other people don't have. So they're actually very powerful people in social standing as well.
Right.
And this is the initial Venus that we see. This is the second house Venus. But she then decides to go into the underworld. I mean, she chooses to go to the underworld. She's not actually dragged there. Her sister Ishriqagul, her husband has died. So she decides she's going to go visit Ishriqagul. Now, Ishriqagul has a different kind of power. She's the queen of the underworld. And so she has that power. And, Inanna decides to go there and to visit the sister. And the sister forces her to, at every gate when she descends, to get rid of all of her adornments. She has to give up her crown at one gate, her breastplate that says, "Come man, come." She has to give that up, all her jewelry, all her clothes, so that when she arrives at the underworld, she's naked. And so, this story is about the relationship between Aphrodite and Pluto, although Ishriqagul was our first goddess of the underworld. It's now Pluto. And so they're both very powerful, but in different ways. Mm-hmm. And, Aphrodite is struck dead by Ishriqagul. Ishriqagul is pissed off she's there. She's mourning the loss of her husband. Aphrodite doesn't get it. She's living in the superficial world of beauty and status, and Ishriqagul's there mourning the death of her husband, and she just strikes Aphrodite dead. She's like, she gives her the eye of envy. And so, then that's when Aphrodite has to change. She has to, so we really, you can see that Aphrodite, or Inanna and Ishriqagul, are shadow sides of each other. So this represents a side of Aphrodite that she hasn't allowed to come into her life. The side that is very powerful, but has an understanding of the underworld. And the underworld, from a archetypal Hegelian perspective, Jung, is the place where we stand beneath and we see what people's real motivations are, their real desires. Why are we really here? I mean, going back to what we said before, eighth house issues of, we got to follow our path, we got to follow our desire in life.
It's interesting. This is sort of new to me over the past few months, seeing this other side of Venus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do think it's interesting with my Venus in the 8th placement, because there are certain things in my life that I just haven't wanted to touch. And there have been periods of time where I do feel like dragged towards some type of resolution. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to have to investigate that a little bit more.
Well, yeah, the idea that she goes willingly, it doesn't always feel that way to us.
Right.
But Jung always said, people go, the self knows, what we need. And so the self makes us go places we wouldn't normally go.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about with your paper? I know you're...
Well, we need to just finish the choice.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the last step is the choice. And so I wanted to just say that because what she has to do is, in the choice, you have to let go of something of value. And so there's some kind of a sacrifice, because you can't go to the underworld and come back without a sacrifice. So in the myth, if you have time to look at my paper, to come back to the upper world, she has to sacrifice something. Someone else has to take her place. And when she comes to the upper world, the person she ends up choosing is her husband, because her husband is still sitting on the throne, got his crown, he's partying, having a great time.
She's like, it's your turn.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it's, she's been there, done that, and now she realizes that's what I got to get rid of. That's what she's sacrificing. It's a part of the self. And so she has to make a choice. And that's who she chooses to go. So an example, my client, the choice she made when she moved into this warrior state was, the heck with that board at the ashram, I'm publishing this book. I don't care, I'm gonna go against what they've said I can and can't do, because it was so important to her that she chose to then go ahead, get that translation done, and to publish that new book.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Such a good case study, especially when people really have these things that they're going through. Because some transits and retrogrades might not hit so hard, but if it's just hitting in their chart in a strong way, then that story really comes through.
Exactly. Like if the retrograde degree of Venus happens to make a square, an opposition, a hard aspect, then you're really going to feel it more intensely.
So thank you so much for sharing your paper.
Oh, yeah.
And you did submit it to talk about it next year at Norwalk, so fingers crossed.
Yes. Thank
That
you.
would be
Thank
really
you.
exciting.
Yeah, and it's going to be published in the AA Journal, I'm told, in the next issue. So I'm looking forward to that.
So we're promoting it. Well, I'll put the link somewhere to make sure you guys can go ahead and read that. Okay, show and tell. What did you bring?
An armillary. So an armillary, this is a miniature model that they would have used for, looking at the heavens and positioning where the planets and stars were. So, here we have the zodiac. Here we have the
Wait, what is
zodiac.
this called?
An armillary.
Armillary.
Yeah. And so we have an image of the Earth in the middle, and the
that's
meridian.
Malachite, isn't it?
I believe so.
Malachite,
Yeah. And then we have the meridian that goes around the top. You can see this would be like the equator and the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn and the ecliptic, the path of the sun. And then we have the path where that crosses the ecliptic. This would be the summer solstice, and this would be the fall equinox and the spring equinox and the other points. So it's an image of, the prime meridian and the various
that is so cool. I feel like I've seen this before, but I never really knew what it was.
Well, you've seen pictures like in the alchemical pictures. So my father took up yachting when I was in college. So one year for his birthday, I gave this to him. And I also gave him a sextant, which they used to actually position, so mariners would use these.
Right.
And so then after my father's death, I think I gave you everyone. I'm going to take that back.
Yeah, that's a gift.
So I'd like to keep it in my office.
That is so cool. Now I want one, an armillary. Well, I know what I'm asking for my birthday. Exciting. Well, thank you for sharing that. I learned something new. Do you ever actually use it?
No, that's the one thing I really want. I really want to eventually get a telescope and actually, this is just a small miniature.
We have to. We should get our group together and go to the observatory.
Oh yeah, I did do that
fun.
one time, but I would love to do it again.
I don't know if I told you this, but I go to the planetarium by myself. Just drive up there, walk up the hill, and see a show. There's shows all day. There's one about the ocean. There's one about cellular biology.
Yeah, I didn't realize it. I just thought it was all about the planets.
Yeah, and then there's
stars.
the one for the stars,
cool.
the center of the universe,
That's
or whatever
really cool.
it's called. So that one's my favorite. But I just wander up there, and it makes me happy.
Well, they had that night too, when people all bring their telescopes out.
I know.
And that's when
We
I
have
went.
to go.
A friend Kimberly, you met Kimberly last night. We went, and it was fun because people were, you could see the various, planets, and it was fun.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I can't wait to do that. So that's on my bucket list right now. Okay, I'm so embarrassed because every week I talk about Beyoncé and I keep promising I keep promising that okay, next week we're going to look at somebody else. And I had Chapel Roan pulled up, but I'm going to save that for my next episode. Do you know Chaperone? Not really.
No.
She's kind of this new artist. Like you've probably heard her song. It's like the Pink Pony Club. Anyway, but because we talked about fixed stars last night, we looked up Beyoncé, and it was so interesting. So
it was. You have to bring it up. Absolutely.
So Cameron Cassidy, that was the teacher who did the fixed stars class that you took, and I rewatched online. And basically, his thing is he took the Firmicus bright degrees of a fixed star and kind of like made it even a little more accurate astronomically, and then was looking at, for influential people, how many of their personal planets in particular were conjunct this fixed star in that brightest degree, the brightest star of that decan of that constellation. So he said that, he showed Elon Musk's chart as an example because he had like 6, I think, or 5 or 6. And he's like, this is the most I've seen. And obviously he's the wealthiest person on the planet and he has a lot of influence. And I was like, of course, because I can't help myself. I'm like, well, let's look at Beyonce's, as a test. And it turned out it was very interesting, actually, because almost every planet, and we did look at the outers, and we looked at fortune, midheaven, ascendant. The only 2 out of every point we looked at that didn't have a fixed star was Mercury and Uranus. Every other single planet and point was on a fixed star within a few degrees.
That was amazing, really.
So, I mean, I'm like, I have to email Cameron and tell him I found somebody better.
But what I loved about it was they tell a story.
Right.
And the group, everybody knew Beyonce so well. Everybody's like, oh, of course, that fixed star has to do with the sisters. And she was very involved with her sisters.
I have a list, and I don't have to go through all of them, but her son was 17 Leo on Zosma, which was a benefit by disgrace.
Oh, yeah?
Which we talked about, Lemonade. And then Saturn and Virgo, Porima and Vindimatrix, the gatherer, so harvesting what's planted, disciplined wisdom, cycles of return, coming back to what you learned. And we see her like reinventing and reimagining her material over and over again and really putting energy into it, and kind of holding on to things till it's the right moment.
Yes. It was a great example. I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, I'm going to try to talk about Chapel Roan next week. So let's talk about the cosmic forecast, what's kind of coming up a little bit. Okay. I know we have Jupiter just moved into Cancer, and I think people are already starting to see some shifts where just getting that little extra help with things, like getting that job, getting that promotion, where Jupiter wasn't able to help. Now it's like, okay. What is your experience with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love Jupiter finally moving into Cancer because I'm moving into my Jupiter return in Cancer. And it's going to be moving into my 7th house. It's still in the 6th. But yeah, I feel like, I've always been a nurturer, but I feel like I'm trying to nurture, bring people together, but also I'm getting nurtured in return. And it's just making me feel more confident, Jupiter. So that, like I said, I reached out, I put a submission to speak at NORWAC. And, I just feel like and I want to do more research and study. And I just feel so excited and confident to move forward. I feel Jupiter really brings that confidence and
yeah, I mean, it's
connecting with other people. Zeus, he's just always like going after this person or that person and changing his form. And
in Cancer, supporting the moon, in the domicile of the moon. So Jupiter does have this affinity for the moon, and I think giving us those emotional benefits. As I'm doing horary throughout the year, we look at Jupiter and Venus as giving you those things that you need, the angels that give you things. And Jupiter and Gemini, the past year, it's like people ask these horary questions, and Jupiter just can't give you what you want. It wants to, but it can't. So in Cancer, if you get those aspects in horary, you're going to get the thing. And that's what I'm seeing people start to get, those things that they're asking for, because Jupiter is in.
And do you feel like it is connected to the whole nurturing thing, that they nurture or they're being nurtured, or the people? I wonder if I'm experiencing it that way, but I just wonder. Of course, it's in my house of relationships, so.
I think being in the domicile of the moon.
Yeah.
Just
good placement.
Yeah. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about Saturn and Aries. So you're probably more familiar with some of these conjunctions because you really are interested in those outer planets. Saturn is approaching Neptune.
Right.
And then is going to backtrack, and then they're both going to go back into Pisces.
Right, and then of course Uranus is behind, sort of like.
So
going to make
So
an aspect later.
what I'm thinking with everything that's going on with California and the White House, I see this Saturn approaching Neptune as this going into a very sort of dangerous place where the lines are going to really get blurred with authority. And Saturn is in its fall in Aries, so there's just this really aggressive approach to power. And what I see is we're getting this sort of taste of it. I think it's going to let up on the gas. We're going to go back into Pisces where things are going to be a little bit more like we're not sure what's happening, but we're going to leave it. We're just going to leave it alone. And then we're going to return back to Aries. And I think whatever's going to happen is going to come more full force. So I'm a little bit concerned.
Yes, no,
personally.
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of people are worried about that heroic Aries energy, just maybe like going full force and getting, I mean, the interesting thing is though that, we look at it from a mundane perspective and from a psychological perspective. So mundane perspective, people are worried about things. I mean, Saturn and Neptune are water. Saturn dissolves, Neptune dissolves Saturn, dissolves structures, dissolves leaders, even though they may be trying to go out. I mean, a great image for me is the military parade. Saturn in Aries is supposed to happen Saturday, is likely to get rained out because of thunderstorms.
Oh, I have to post this so you can.
I mean, I just heard this on the news, and I thought, oh, that's so Saturn Neptune. From a mundane perspective, it's going to get rained out. So there's the potential for the dissolution and loss of leadership. So, what way that's going to go, who knows? But, from a psychological perspective, I always think of Neptune as the realm of the imagination and images. And Saturn is how can we manifest? So right now, I feel like it's a great time for people to be thinking, what is it what are the images that want to be expressed in my life? What are my idealizations, Neptune? What's my vision for life? And how am I going to manifest that? How am I going to give it the structure of Saturn?
Do you think that applies to us as a country? Like what we want our identity to be as a country?
Oh, yeah.
So I find Saturn to be really influential in the U.S. chart. Saturn is in Libra in that U.S. chart. Right now it's in an opposition to that in Aries. And it just feels like it's antagonizing a lot of what our values are as a people.
Yes, absolutely.
That's my
Absolutely.
feeling.
And for the military parade, there was going to, if it happens, I don't know, there is, if it happens, going to be a counter protest of this group called No King.
Right.
Or No Monarch.
I've heard a lot about this.
And so it's like, there's a real opposition between, our values versus this idea that we have this new king or monarch or Saturn and Aries going, he's been, who knows? But we always have to look at the positive side, what are the potential positives?
Well, I'm not of the perspective like bury your head in the sand, with things. I think protesting is important. I think speaking up for yourself is important. And I also do think voicing what you do want, because there's only so much pushing against we can do. We also need to communicate what we want. And I think people do that in protests too. They communicate what they want, what the change that they're looking for. And I think we all need to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And, I was taking a sort of a refresher class on the I Ching with an old Jungian analyst mentor of mine. And in one of the classes, he said, well, let's throw an I Ching. And the student said, let's look at the situation. And of course, we all knew what he meant because this was like back in January, February. And so what is the situation, obviously, with regard to the new administration and what everybody's going through, the terrible situation. And the image that came up was the sense of each individual connecting with the other to be able to sort of like take a stand. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a perfect image for what was just beginning to happen. People were starting to form small communities of support. That's what the I Ching was about, forming your small community of support in order to counter. And it actually said, if no one stands to counter, then the king will take over. And we were all like, oh my gosh, how accurate could that be? How accurate.
Yikes.
Yeah, so for me, what I did I had just begun at that time, was I emailed family members so I knew we're of like mind. I come from a large family. And I said, let's email each other every Monday and share with each other, call the office of our senator and representatives and state what we want and what we don't like, And I was forming a mini community of support because I felt like I need to do it and I need to be reminded to do it, and we should remind each other. So that's just one little community.
That's a great recommendation because I think it has to be that way.
It is. And you're seeing a lot of communities being formed to try to stop the situation, whether it's legal or protesters or
and praying for us. But we got to do more than that.
Our small communities to take a stand.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that guidance and that story. Okay, so to close, I'd love to ask, so I know this story is sort of like your love letter to Venus and what it's taught you. Are you working with Venus every day? Are you still sort of thinking about how do you work with that, or is there anything else that you're kind of working on in your head?
Well, yeah, I actually do want to go back and write out other stories of the Venus retrograde. I really want to understand it better. I've just been through one, and we all have, and I feel like I've been wanting to like go back and say, okay, those were examples from a long time ago, but they're still fresh. I mean, they're not, any example is still a great example, but I just kind of want to get to know more people's stories. I've been thinking about that, but also after looking at this mythology and finding how relevant it was to Aphrodite, I thought, my daughters kept talking about the Mars retrograde, which we just went through. And I was like, so what myth is Mars retrograde? And so that's actually something I really want to get into is what's the myth? You know, because I really want to understand Mars retrograde better. I want to understand what are we really going through when we're going through a Mars retrograde. So that's actually something that is probably kind of still under the it's still like under the wraps, because I'm like, okay, now I got to go back to mythology and see where that leads.
I love your grasp of the mythology. So if you want to explore your chart, do you do readings? Do you have any resources?
Yes, I do readings. I mean, if you just Google my name, my website comes up. So I trained as a psychologist and as a Jungian analyst, and then I did Liz Green's Center for Psychological Astrology in London. So, you know, I actually started to study astrology the same time I started reading Jung. Because my husband was a Jungian analyst, and I had just met him. He was putting on conferences at Notre Dame where I was. I went to the conference. I was like, okay, this is my world suddenly.
You loved it.
Yeah, I just fell right into it. And so I've always loved the mythology. And so when I do readings, I take quite a bit of time and I go through the mythology of every planet. If I'm going to talk about, you know, Venus, I'm going to tell her stories. If I'm going to talk about Mars, I'm going to talk about his stories.
You do the research.
That's why I feel people can relate to their chart, because Jung said psyche is image, and so people can relate through images. So I want to create an image, a story, so they can better understand Venus or Mars. And when you tell the stories, then you start to talk about the house that it's in, what area of life. Then suddenly people are like, you don't have to tell them what's happening in their life, because like, oh yeah, I get it. And when you say, well, does that make any sense? Like, yeah, this is all about, and they'll share with you, and it's just wonderful. So I'm kind of doing a form of like sharing mythology so they can kind of understand their chart, and a bit of support and counseling.
Because it's self-reflective.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a big part of a reading. It's not just like, oh, here's kind of
just telling them who they are.
Who they are.
You're tall, you're blonde.
Like, what is going on for you? And it can be more therapeutic.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yeah, and the stories, people connect to stories, just like we connect to stories in film or literature, and we can see ourselves, and it's same thing.
Beautiful. That was a great, I should have used that as your introduction, but wrapping up, that was a beautiful way to kind of frame up what you do. And I'll put your links and things in the description.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining us, Judith. It was so great to have you. This was so much fun, diving into the mythology, learning about Venus, the darker side of Venus as well, and how she comes out having sacrificed something anew. So it was all really, really interesting and fun. And I know you'll be having another salon soon, I'm sure. So I'll see you there, if not sooner.
Yes.
And thanks for listening. Let us know if you have any questions or anything that you want me to kind of talk more about next time. But otherwise, we'll talk to you later. Bye.